Good evening, and call to order the Citizens Budget Review Advisory Committee for Monday, February 29th, 2016. Would you all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Ed Herlihy,
Here.
Terry Taylor,
Here.
Sergio Moda,
Here.
Bruce Hoffman, Michael Frank,
Here.
Tim Slavin,
Here.
Got to get Mr. Hoffman off the list.
Yeah, he shouldn't even be on there.
Okay.
Deanna Farmer is
actually-
excused.
Sorry, call Harry Hall.
I'm sorry?
Harry Hall.
Harry Hall?
Yeah.
Here.
We were looking at old minutes. We had the wrong names here.
Did I get this?
And
You all
Mr.
set?
Farmer has an excused absence.
Okay. Could I have a motion, please, for the approval of the minutes of January 11th, 2016?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, that's takes care of the minutes.
We do the pledge? Just saying, we didn't do the pledge of allegiance. Yes, we did. Did we? Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. And without further ado, Mr. Kilgore, presentation of the first quarter 2016 budget report. Microphone, Ken.
We're getting off to a great start this evening, but we're usually more organized. In your packets, the council agenda transmittal form that I'll use for the presenting the budget report to the city council on March 23rd, be their next scheduled meeting. I'll be presenting that the budget changes made during the quarter were as listed on the sheet. I did see on the fourth line that I didn't get the number in there. That should have been $10,000 instead of zeros. The highlight of the report is probably the additional funding to the Main Street project back in October to widen what was originally expected with the scope of that project, and also the allocation of additional monies to street paving work. On the pages that reflect the graphics, the highlights of basically each fund, the general fund is looking fairly well with 39% at the end of the first quarter of revenues received. The department spending is 26.92%. So for this time of the year, the amount of spread between the revenues and expenses in general fund is pretty consistent because we do receive a lot of our revenues in the first quarter. As far as the three main sources of revenues to general fund include the electric franchise, electric utility tax, and half-cent sales tax. And those funds are about almost $50,000 more than received this first quarter of the year compared to the first quarter of last year. The departmental spending we'll get to in more detail with the additional spreadsheets that are provided, but there are just a few departments that are over the 25% mark, but overall, as I said, the total spending is 26.9%. On the next page, we get into the special revenue funds and the capital projects presentation. I show here that the Collections for the current year for the local option gas taxes, DST funds, and stormwater fees are comparing fairly well to last year. And the amount of projects, there again, I think I'll defer till we get to the more detailed sheet on the capital projects funds, but there are some rather large projects that haven't been expended that are still in abeyance at this point. All our debt service and long-term debt obligations, we are in compliance with the terms of those and up to date on the payments. The golf course, the information there is rather skewed because of the irrigation project. So we're showing a lot more of expenditures because of the size of that project and the amount of reimbursements from the DST and the loan from the building department funds. On the airport, just in quick, briefly, is also swayed because of the amount of the grant revenue that comes in and the amount of the grant projects. There is some deficit in the amount of reserves because we do have to advance those funds, and these are all reimbursement grants, so we have to expend the money and then attempt to get the reimbursement. The building department fund, the reserves look healthy, over $1 million, which is part of the reason we said we could afford to loan funds to the golf course. The amount of spread between revenues and expenses for the first quarter was some $64,000, so it's even better than we've had in the last couple of years as far as the results of activities for the first quarter. I did provide additional handouts of the next three sheets. I had an error on the percentages of budget numbers that were shown. So the revised numbers should show you will reflect for the general fund, the 39% of revenues received and 26.9% of expenditures made. The departments that were rather high over their budget, there were good reasons for that. The city clerk's office, she had the election expenses during the first quarter. The police department did a good job of expending or obligating the funds for their capital equipment. So that makes their expenditures seem high for the first quarter of the fiscal year. The other big item is in the non-departmental, where we pay the contribution to the CRA in the first quarter of the year. We do that before December 31st, according to the statute. So with that shown, they have a high percentage of their budget expended. In the capital project status report, I think the highlight here is that the equipment and a large deal of the equipment that was scheduled to be purchased is already either expended or obligated. We do have, with the other projects, there's the constant delay that we run into as far as getting the final design, getting the permitting, and going out for bid for the work and so forth. So we don't see a lot of activity on some of the major construction line items, but we expect that to show better, hopefully before year end. The page I provide on the investments and on the cash reserves, we have about $13 million of monies deposited both in the local bank, the Seacoast National Bank, and a portion in the State Board of Administration cash account. As far as reserves, the results of the fiscal year, we have a draft audited financial statements that has been completed, and I can tell you that the reserve amount for general fund, according to that draft, is $5,286,473,000. We do have about $12,600 of a project that was incomplete at year end that'll come off that balance, as well as the amount that we still hold in the renewal and replacement equipment and facilities reserve, so there's $336,000 of that allocated for the purpose of replacing or repairing equipment. So that leaves us the amount available for emergencies then at $4,937,603. So we've pretty much held on to our $5 million level of desired cash reserves. When you look at it, if there really was an emergency, we would have access to the $336,000 in the renewal and replacement account as well. So that looks satisfactory. The balance of the report are the reports from each department. You were sent an additional email that for Public Works, they were a bit tardy in getting the information before I had to issue this report. I'd be glad to respond to any questions or concerns you might want to express.
Okay, let's start with the questions. Mr. Slavin?
None here.
Mr. Taylor?
Ken, I just need a verification on some abbreviations. On the resolution page, R1605, I just want to make sure I understood what they were. Adjustments to reflect the trade-in of AED, and the other one was MACE. Just was curious what the abbreviation stood for.
Okay.
They're Exhibit A, about halfway down the page.
Oh, the AED was the automatic defibrillation units.
Okay.
MACE is the multi-agency crime enforcement.
Multi-agency what?
Crime enforcement.
Okay, thank you.
Michael?
None, thank you.
Sergio?
None at this moment, thank you.
Mr. Hall?
On the right button. Ken, it looks to me like the expenditures are behind revenues, which is a good thing, and as compared to previous years, looks very good. The operating expense, well, there's expenses for salaries. Do we anticipate seeing the second quarter a lesser amount than the previous year due to the early retirements?
Yes, the early retirement should have an impact for the remaining quarters of the year. The next quarter, however, as we paid off those payouts, they actually would show up in the second quarter. So we're going to have a significant excess of the personnel expenses are going to be high for the next quarter as well. But with the replacement at lower, with lower classified employees and those positions that we chose not to fill by the end of the year, there will be, with the payouts and all, there's about $240-something thousand that will have to be, that will hit reserves in this fiscal year. Now, with our plan, we'll get that paid back in next fiscal year to make us whole again.
So with those expenditures, looks like the second quarter would be pretty much like the first,
Probably.
which is still running much better than last year, which I commend you. Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be, I don't want to mislead you. The second quarter is going to hit pretty hard. It probably will be worse than the first quarter because of the payout amounts.
Still, that answered my question. It looks like the way expenditures and revenues are coming in, that's going to be recouped fairly easily, and we're still in good shape.
Okay.
But the third quarter, we start seeing some changes as far as operating salaries.
Well, like I say, we have not adjusted these budget numbers as of yet to add the amount of the payout amounts to each department's personnel budget.
I was looking strictly at actuals.
So once we get those added in there, the percentage comparison should look much better as we proceed through the year.
Thank you.
But Ken, the point would be that, to carry this one step further, the third and fourth quarter, we would start to see the salary reductions that we've made, would we not? We would see them. I mean, the salaries would be a lower number.
Your percentage comparisons, once we do adjust the budget for the payouts,
Yeah,
your percentage comparisons will look much better. They'll look more in line. By the third quarter, it should be around 75%.
yeah, but if you didn't pay, if you just took it by the quarter, the third quarter by itself, in actual dollars, is going to be less, correct?
Yes.
Because we got less people, or less dollars that we're paying for people.
Right, and we would have
Okay.
the past history of the payouts and everything.
Right.
So, yes.
And then, of course, next year, we'll see the whole thing, we hope. And
We fully expect to get all those monies paid out,
right,
returned
yes,
through our payroll savings, at least on a one-to-one comparison. Now, if we spend more for the labor agreements, I mean, it all depends on what the budget structure is for next year, you understand. But theoretically, with everything being as it is today at current pay rates and those employees at the rates that we have on board or those that we downsize to, then it should work out good next year.
agreed. Okay. Anybody else got anything on the first quarter? All right, that takes care of the first quarter. Make a motion that the committee recommend approval of Council Resolution 16-05, the first quarter 2016 budget as amended. I need a second.
Seconded.
And all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, discussion of the upcoming budget. I sent you all a memo. I thought in view of a lot of things that are coming up, that I'll get an idea so that I could pass it on to you of what the city manager and the chief financial officer were thinking about the upcoming budget. And I went into that meeting and took with me that memo that I sent you with a list of topics. We didn't get through them all, but I'll discuss them, and please jump in. Questions, comments, and so on and so forth. And I'll go through this quickly. If you've got that memo in front of you, items 1 through 3, the labor negotiations have not started yet, and the city has not formed a package yet or see where they're headed for the whole thing until they have a whole package, which is made up obviously of salary and benefits. We won't have any discussion about that, and obviously there won't be much in the way of discussion as far as the committee is concerned, because those negotiations are private. And we won't know what kind of an operating cost increase the city's going to have until they get through that negotiation, which will coincide almost with the adoption of the budget. It'll be sometime July or August when they have a pretty good idea. as a general discussion, we started to talk about roads. And that got us into the amount of money that the city may or may not have as far as if there is any increase in the assessed property valuation. The city manager is of the opinion that there isn't going to be much of an increase. And I said to him, if you look at what's gone on in the building department, then you might draw the conclusion that things are very active in Sebastian. And as you drive around Sebastian, I think you see a lot of building going on. And I also mentioned the giant retirement facility that's being built, almost finished up on Route 1 next to the Catholic Church. Now, that hasn't come online yet as far as taxation, and we won't see it until next year. Because remember that property taxes are based on, they trail. The property taxes that, assessment, that we see in June will be based on last year, 2015, through December 31, 2015. So it lags. But there have been a lot of houses and other things built, and my own personal number is 5 to 7%. Remember, it was 7.5% last year. So we talked about that a little bit. There is concern that we look forward and whether things are going to stay well or not. Everybody's got his own opinion on that. So whether we have growth or we're flat or we're down, I can throw that up in the air and we can talk all night. What's the number one item as far as the city is concerned going forward? And this comes from the city council. Roads, 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 roads. If you remember, the city council, the staff and city council approved the moving around of money to get up about $750,000 for this fiscal year. And the question is, what are we going to do for this next budget? Where are we going to go? And I imagine most of you have experienced in your driving around the city that we have turned into pothole city in a lot of areas, and the city has a terrible time keeping up with it. And there's an ongoing discussion about how to address that matter. But that has a fairly large sum of money associated with just fixing potholes. So one of the things that we need to do as a committee, I would suggest, is to make suggestions, listen to staff, and see where we are as far as the amount of money that we would recommend to put into roads. Now, if we continue in the third year of the monies that we've recommended addition to roads, that same $100,000 that we raised in taxes 2 years ago is still going to be there. So we can put another $100,000 into roads just from that particular thing. How much staff is going to recommend is still up in the air because they haven't even just barely got started on that. So any thoughts that you have on that, and I'll throw out some ideas and see what you think. One of them is a truly not nice thought, but that is to, quote, raid the general reserve. We've always said in this committee that we wouldn't touch the general fund reserve. I just throw it out there, see what you think about it. I don't know whether the council would go along with it, but this committee has held firm for 5, 6 years, telling the council, no, 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 don't touch that fund. And Ken has worked hard making presentation, some of you saw it last year, about why we keep it at $5 million. There are some very, very good reasons for that. An equally not nice thought is, of course, raising taxes. And of course, we have to see how much if any, the property tax assessment goes up. And what we need to do with that, we also have to think about that we're probably going to have some salary increases. So you've got that. Comments, questions, thoughts? Have you got any ideas? You want to mull it over? I'll go on and then we can see where we can, I'll just go through the rest of it. One of the things that Mr. Griffin, our city manager, said is he's going to cut back on projects. He contends we've had way, way, way too many projects at one time. And as he said, they darn near drowned in them when he took over. There were so many going on, and they've been ongoing. We still have a lot left. And we have some big ongoing projects. We've got a hangar at the airport that hasn't even started construction yet. I don't even think it's gone to bid. Hangar C. We still have to finish East Airport Drive. That's in the process. So we have those kinds of things. And of course, we have the continued problem of drainage. And as you probably know, the staff recommended and the council approved they're not going to do quarter round anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. And they're going to a different method of getting the water off the streets. And they're buying equipment to do that. And that should help the roads. And to some extent help the drainage. So they're going to cut back on that. We discussed the canals a little bit. Basically, there's no money allocated for the canals. The feeling of where they are on the canals is fix them where it's needed. Because the engineering report they got from Hoyle Tanner didn't have too many disastrous areas, and they figured out pretty well how they can fix those with our staff. So that's the story on that. Parks and Rec is going to spend some money, but most of that comes out of funds that they already have. They're going to probably going to build pickleball courts back here and do some other things. And lastly, again, we discussed the items that we added 2 years ago, which was the $100,000 for roads, the $50,000 for All Aboard Florida, and we're going to continue to do that and add to that fund, which will bring that fund to $150,000. And your guess is as good as mine or anybody else's what's going to happen with All Aboard Florida. That's up and down and all over the place. And we also allocated $50,000 for Baffle Box, so that 200 some odd thousand will get allocated, probably get allocated again that way. So that pretty well, let's see what else we had. We did discuss the general fund reserve, the payback for the early retirement, and we discussed one other thing. A few years ago, our previous city manager, Al Minner, had a presentation done for the council about property taxes. And what he wanted to know, and what he wanted to show council, was that Sebastian's property tax was, if not the lowest, very, very near the bottom of every town, every city in the state, every city of its size, that our property tax was exceedingly low. And for those people who may be watching out there who don't understand the property tax, that whole bill that you get once a year isn't the city of Sebastian. City of Sebastian is just a very, very, very small piece of that. That tax bill is made up of the county, the schools, they're the two big ones, and a lot of other things, a lot of other, and fire EMS. And the city is in there at a very small percentage. And that's something that we may look at again just for our own edification as far as taxes go. Okay, I've shot my mouth off for a while. Comments, anybody? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
I'll just comment on the property tax aspect of it, just so that everybody's familiar. The homesteaded properties are protected at a nominal figure at less than 1% increase. So the amount of actual property taxes for homesteaded property will be very limited, but also the commercial property is still going to be protected and capped at 10%. So that's just something to educate yourself on as far as homesteaded and non-homesteaded properties in relation to property taxes. Back to the concern of the roads and the cost of road repair, do we have a history or a number that we can use as a benchmark or a 5-year average?
No. We were heading that way and talking about this like early last year, but after the heavy rains that we had, and then the city engineer reported that, there had been some worsening conditions on several of the roads. So at this point, I wouldn't speculate like an annual appropriation that would make everything good, that we'd, have a continual replacement program. The fact is, I think it goes back to tying into the stormwater, that unless we fix some of that stormwater issue, that we'll continue to see an impact on bad drainage affecting the life of the roads. So, we'll be looking at what streets are in the worst condition, or the engineer is recommending for the next fiscal year. But I'll also be wanting to plan for the long term. I understand where you're coming from, that we should maybe have a target if we're going to, particularly if we go with any kind of tax increase, and say, well, if we add this to our tax revenue base every year and know those funds are coming in, we should know that that's how they would be applied, if we use that as our argument for the increase.
Can we understand what the last 2 years road drainage repair estimate, and just a figure like that?
Well, the other complication is that we both do repairs, and this is key to what source of funds we have available. We do repairs to roadways, using general fund revenues or local option gas taxes. When it comes to actually going in and reconstructing and rebuilding the roadways, then we can tap into the discretionary sales tax monies. The nature of what we were doing this year is primarily the repair, resurfacing kind of projects. And next year, I'm not sure, I don't have that information yet, is what degree of that could be funded from the discretionary sales tax versus what would have to come from local option gas tax and general fund. Not a good answer, I'm sorry.
Just a comment on the roads. For those of you who aren't familiar with the road situation as far as why are we in this problem, it goes back a long way. Very brief history. Don't have the dates. Sebastian Highlands was developed by a company called General Development. They went bankrupt. And if you look at most of the residential streets, the street that goes by my house has an inch of asphalt on it. I measured it the other day in a pothole. And that street is probably, I think General Development did their work in the 60s. So that road is close to 50 years old and has not been resurfaced. Well, the majority of our side streets, residential streets, have one layer of asphalt. And what they put underneath it isn't very good. It's basically, they scooped up Florida sand, mounted it up a little bit, and that's what you got underneath. And as soon as it gets water in it, it washes out. And that's, it's a wonder that we've come this far without the whole thing going after us. And there's no doubt that during the recession, we cut back on any capital project, plus any road repair. I will go so far to say that because the pothole thing has gotten so big and such a problem, that there's been a discussion about buying a machine that will better fill the potholes permanently rather than just putting some asphalt in there and hoping it'll last a few months. But that's, again, a $150,000 project, and Ken's going to figure out how that's going to occur. But that's, and of course, you've all heard about drainage, and any water on the roads, if it's standing water, undermines that sand, and away goes the road. The main road that intersects with my street is absolutely full of potholes, and it's probably never been overlaid, but it probably's got an inch and a half of asphalt. That's about what it looks like. And it just gets pounded. So that's why we have these problems, and a lot of it we inherited, and now it's coming back to roost. And too bad we can't go after general development. Any other thoughts and questions?
Yes, along those same lines, if we were to recommend allocating funds for roads, shouldn't we also couple that with drainage and maybe the suspended quarter round project due to the undermining of the roads from standing water? And also, we talked about possibly using some of the reserves for this. If the city is comfortable with a $5 million fund balance, dipping into it, we really ought to look at some of the history before recommending that. Back in 2004, 2005, I'm sure the city had to dip into the reserve fund, as did the county and other agencies. And initially, I don't know, did you have to deplete most of it or 50% of it at all before you got any funding from FEMA or some other agency?
You're referring back in 2004, 2005 because of the hurricanes and the impact on that, yeah. I'm sure we had to expend monies and wait for recovery between our insurance and FEMA. I don't think it had a long-term consequence. See, the key with the reserves, and not to get into my entire presentation on why that $5 million level is important to us, it's one thing if city properties are damaged, because then we can either recover from the insurance company or FEMA to, so you're talking about just the construction time to replace those or to get them back running or up to speed. But if a storm hits and affects the entire city, and I did some numbers running assumptions that if we have like a 15% of every property in town is damaged or destroyed to the extent that our taxable value drops, and 15% of the businesses are now out of business because theirs is one of the places that were maybe knocked down 100%, all that is affecting the revenue stream. And I projected out, the loss of a 15% in values, an equivalent impact on the revenue stream for the other, like sales taxes and shares of state revenue sharing and so forth. So we would not only have a need perhaps to use reserves to balance the budget for a couple years, but we'd also be looking at cutting back on our level of service. I mean, there would be such a consequence until the complete city was rebuilt back to 100% or more.
The reason I used 2004 and fiscal year 2005-06 is because of those major storms we had. So we have some experience on what may be a number that we could live with, maybe short term. Would there be any funding there possibly in this $5 million that could be put towards roads, or no, this is like our absolute, let's not go below that because we know from history we can't go below $5 million if we have another storm or a contingency like we've had in the past?
Well, it's like insurance, really. What level of insurance do you want to have in the bank? Because, I mean, we can assume a 15% level of damage. We can assume 50% damage. We don't know. It won't necessarily be the same amount of damages that we had in those prior periods. So,
well, those years were so catastrophic. If we have anything worse than that, this $5 million is not going to cover it anyhow. So
that could be one conclusion. True.
As a matter of general discussion, I would not want this body, speaking for myself personally, to set the precedent for going into that fund, especially for foreseeable projects like roads, and especially until staff makes that recommendation and we actually have a hard figure before this board. I think that conversation's pretty much moot.
Good point. Ken, do you still have that presentation regarding the general fund reserve?
Yes, I do.
It's a PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
If those of you who haven't seen it, get in touch with Ken. He can send it to you, because it is a PowerPoint, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it?
Well, I had the PowerPoint, but I also had a multitude of spreadsheets that extended out the consequences month to month and so forth. So those spreadsheets may be outdated by a couple of years now, but I think the principle would still be disclosed in the PowerPoint I gave, and
so if any of you
it'll
want
be good
it,
info.
get in touch with Ken. He can send it to you. At least it'll give you an idea of why the general fund is at $5 million. And we thought it was a good point, because there have been several comments from the public over time. Oh, spend the money out of the general fund. You don't need it. Well, that's, as far as this board has been concerned, and I agree with you totally, is we don't want to touch it, because it is an insurance policy. Okay, anybody else got anything?
I think we're pretty much in unison on the importance of roads and the importance of drainage. Without proper drainage, then it's like you're not foreseeing the future effects, and that future effects, of course, as we've seen with the drainage issue of having bad roads and potholes and so on and so forth. On the terms of the general fund, I agree with some of my fellow committee members about not touching the general fund. I also, myself, I just can't approve a tax increase, and that's where I just stand philosophically. And that's all for now. Thank you.
One thing I should make clear about the drainage situation. It isn't that they've stopped. They're going to continue the ditch cleaning, ditch clearing. But they've allocated funds to get the water off the road. How they're going to do that? What's happened over time is that the swales have built, the grass is built up above the road in a lot of places. So what they're going to do, they bought a machine that goes into the swale and cleans it out. What do they call it? An alligator? Or a crocodile? Or an armadillo. Well,
I think we've ordered the machine. I don't think it's on hand yet.
We have one.
But we have an older model that, yeah.
And in fact, there was a discussion with the city manager that they may go for a second one next year. This is a tractor-mounted thing with an arm, long arm, that reaches down into the swale and cuts the grass and cleans it so that there is a clear ditch. The other thing they're going to do is come along with a grader, and they're going to cut the grass in the swale, right at the edge of the road. And of course, there's going to be a flurry of phone calls, "You ruined my grass." Well, it's got to be done. We've got to get the water off the roads in a lot of areas where that grass has grown up higher. And I've got one right in front of my house, so I'm going to take a beating. But that's what's going on as far as the drainage is concerned, is to get that off the road, and they're buying that equipment.
A question, Ed. If we do that, is there a need for the quarter-round project?
That's why they suspended it.
Okay.
In my personal estimation, I have quarter round in front of my house, and it works just fine. But in a lot of areas, it's been broken up.
Right.
People don't take care of it or don't care about it. One of my people in my neighborhood has pulled out 4 sections of it and turned it upside down as a cover for something. I don't know what that's all about, but there are those kinds of problems, and it takes a lot just to maintain the quarter round. Was it a good idea? Yes. But they felt that doing these other things and actually getting the water off the street, because quarter round doesn't get it off the street. It disposes of it once it gets off the street. So that was why they want to update the armadillo and add an armadillo and get at it all around town. Okay? Okay, anything else on that subject, on the subjects? All right. As time goes on and we have more information from the city manager and from Ken, we'll bring it to you. Or even better still, as time goes on, get them in here and we spend some time having some direct conversation with them. Sometimes that's difficult to do. Okay.
Ed?
Yes.
On the, going back to the general fund balance, I wasn't advocating that we should use it. It was brought up as a possibility by the board that maybe we should look at it for road repair, and I was trying to make the point that if we were to consider that, we really need to look at history of the fund balance in a catastrophic situation like we had in 04 and 05 to see if it would even be possible to use something like that short term. But I too do not recommend ever touching the fund balance unless absolutely necessary.
And I agree with you, because I've been pushing that for 4 or 5 years. Well, I've been on this committee 7 going on 8 years. And I guess back about 6 years ago, we took a stand, and at first it wasn't really well received by council, but they've caught on to the whole thing, and Ken has done a great job explaining it to them, as you'll see if you look at his PowerPoint and associated documents, and explained that it is an insurance policy. And Lord knows how many times in these meetings I've told a story about Lakeland, with a freeze a few years ago, and the strawberry people drew down the water to cover up the strawberries, and all of a sudden Lakeland sank. They had sinkholes all over the place. Their general fund reserve was gone, filling sinkholes. I think their general fund reserve was $3-4 million, which is low for a city that size, which is much bigger than we are. So it can happen, and a hurricane could wipe out our $5 million. But you need, as Ken points out in his report, it's ready cash. It's right there, because you got to have cash out the door right then. Almost like you put it in an envelope and hand it to people. Okay. Anything else on this subject? All right, let's move along to item 7, discussion of the upcoming sales tax referendum. If you didn't know, the 1% sales tax expires at the end of 2017, I believe. Is that correct, Ken? Well, in any event, the county...
I think it's December 31st, 2019, according to this resolution, which would be our...
Yeah, that's what it says. You're right. Okay. In any event, the county who's responsible for the discretionary sales tax is going to put it on the ballot this November. And the city council of Sebastian, I sent you the resolution and the backup material for it. The city council supported that, and we got into a discussion between myself and the city manager and Ken about this, and thought we'd bring it to your attention and see if you folk would support that resolution, and we'll just tell the city council, it's one more thing, tell them that we support the resolution. And so it's as simple as that. What would happen, we asked the question of ourselves, what would happen if that went away? And what would happen, basically, is if that money wasn't there, 2 things. All right. There are a lot of things that we wouldn't get done, or if we were going to raise the same amount, it would be a very good-sized hit to raise, what's the total amount we get from DST? Million, I haven't got the number.
Yes, this year it's about 2.9 million.
If 2.9 million went away, we'd be in some pretty good hurt. Would hit, even if half of that hit, say 1.5 million hit the sales, to hit the property tax, that would be pretty big. So that was the thought behind it, and I see where you gentlemen want to go as far as supporting it or not supporting it.
Are you asking for a formal
Yeah.
recommendation?
Yeah,
I support that fully.
Are we basically, the referendum is going from 6.5% to a 7% sales tax?
well, no, they're just going to keep the 1 cent. They're not
Keep
going to
it.
raise it,
Just keep it
just keep it.
at 6.5% total?
Oh, it's 7.
7?
You're thinking of St. Lucie.
Yeah, every little jurisdiction is a little bit different.
Right.
And
Yeah, so it would stay at 7,
I would be in favor of it.
yeah.
Same here, be in favor.
You guys?
Yep. As long as it stays the same, that's okay. No increase.
I believe to be fiscally responsible, we need to keep it.
Okay. All right. I'll let the city council know, probably very briefly at the next meeting. All right. Public input. Anybody from the public wish to speak? 3 gentlemen in the back don't wish to speak. Ken, anything for you?
Just a quick mention, the state legislature, we watch them with some concern every year. One thing that's been proposed is to adjust the cap that we have on what millage rate we can set. And we figure a rollback rate and a maximum millage rate every year. Because we haven't gone with the maximum each year since Save Our Homes was enacted, we basically accumulated some credits. That, according to the statute, you can only increase the millage by 10% with a majority vote. You can go beyond 10% with a supermajority. But we could, if you ever had a circumstance where this city, in terms of home rule, wanted to levy a higher millage rate for whatever reasons, if the state legislature, if the bill that was introduced anyway should be adopted, they would start not allowing us to recoup those years of good behavior. So we can be austere and be well behaved in terms of being responsible with the millage rate, and then something happen and maybe want to do something beyond and not be able to because of the state mandate. Now, last I heard, the bill has not been adopted, and you know how it goes through a committee process, and I know the League of Cities is opposed to it because of home rule. But just to give you a heads up, it's out there as every year we look at, it's what the legislature might do, so.
That it?
That's all I have.
Okay. Committee members, anybody got anything they want to say? Nobody's got anything to say. And the next meeting is June the 6th. I suspect that we will have a meeting sometime prior to that, which will could conceivably, I don't know whether when or what it'll be, but we may have a meeting where Joe Griffin joins us with Ken, and it'll probably be after they get well into the budget process and have some ideas where they are or where they're heading, so that we could have a back and forth discussion about that. And I leave you with the thought, as I said, the major concentration is going to be roads, roads, roads. So if you've got any bright ideas on how we can come up with road money, think about them. If you've got them, send them to Ken, and he'll send them out to all of us. Always do it in a quick email. If you've got any ideas that you can spread around. Anybody got anything else?
I know there's been a lot of talk this evening on the road concern and the drainage particularly. Those are both probably go side by side. And we can see where we budgeted significantly. So is there anything in particular, or a list or additional projects, street by street, that we may want to be looking at?
The city engineer is working on a list. All the departments were scheduled to turn in their capital improvement request at the end of this next week. So he's aiming to try to do his studies and his surveys of where the worst conditions are, and give me some kind of itemized listing of, which streets and what the price tag might be. And Ed has a good point as far as we get through the capital improvement program, to throw out a draft document or something based on staff's, what staff's put together, and have the committee comment on that. The operating budget is very difficult to get very serious about until after June 1st, when we get our preliminary taxable values. So, but the capital improvement program, we'll start formulating that, and that dovetails into the operating budget, of course. But we can sure keep in mind some kind of report back to the committee of kind of where we are on the capital program, maybe a month from now, but a lot sooner than June, so.
Okay. All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen.